Okay, I am going to start.
Okay. What's your topic today, Barb?
I'm taking a vacation in Scotland, okay? When I was a kid, we went on vacation to the north of Scotland to stay with some relatives. And while we were there, this was in the 60s, we went to the Dounreay Fast Reactor, which is a big experimental nuclear plant built way the hell up there, where the North Sea meets the Atlantic. I think I remember that we actually went inside that dome.
Wow.
And I'm actually a bit scared and surprised if they did that, but it was so long ago, I can't be sure. They told us that this reactor makes more power, more fuel than it consumes.
This is a plutonium machine?
Yes. And I said to myself, oh no, that's silly. You can't do that. And it took a long time before I realized exactly what it was that they were doing. And in fact, they were making more power than they consumed. This actually fed the national grid for some 20 or 30 years, but not a very high level. And it was like many of the experimental reactors that were here in the US. It's in an unpopulated, mostly unpopulated area, just in case. And you can see that this is a pretty remote
Is this the
site.
one that provides all the electricity that Scotland uses?
No, this is
This is
not
not-
operational anymore. This was an experimental, which had a low power output.
It's more of a historic reactor.
Right. And so that leads me into why are we here and why are we talking about nuclear energy? And so you guys know all this stuff, but temperatures are going up remarkably fast. This is the 10th month in a row where global temperatures have been above average. And Minnesota has a mandate to make 100% carbon-free energy by 2040, which I support. We have to replace gas for cars. We have to replace fossil fuels for heat and industry. We basically have to stop burning this stuff. And what's more, we have to make at least 2, maybe 3 times more energy in 2040 than we make right now in terms of electric energy. Just because we have no more gas or coal to fall back on. And in addition to that, Minnesota has a no new nuclear mandate. And so let's look at what sort of a pickle this gets us into. We currently get our energy as a mix. We have some nuclear, some wind, solar, some coal, some gas, and the percentages are approximately what we've got here. And the actual energy for last year in terms of gigawatt hours comes up there. It's easier to think about this in terms of the actual energy that each source provides. Now let's do some experiments, just thought experiments. Suppose we cut the coal to 0 and we cut the gas to 0. But we still want to have the same amount of electrical energy, which we would want to do, of course. And let's say that we keep the nuclear power plants, the 2 of them that we have, we'll keep them going at the same level. What do we have to do? We have to boost wind and solar in order to make that work. And we have to boost it quite a bit, from 1,400 to 3,400. Now let's ask another question. What about 2040? Suppose we go to 2040 and we need only 2 times as much energy as we've got now. And we're not going to have any coal or gas. And we're going to keep the same amount of nuclear that we have now. Now we have to fill in everything else with wind and solar. How much do we need? Well, you can see it here. It's rather a large amount. And you look at what happens to our need for wind and solar energy over that time frame, it's enormous. Plus, of course, if we have a grid that depends a little bit on some nuclear, which is a stable baseline, and a lot on wind and solar, which fluctuate. Sometimes they come and sometimes they go. We need a huge amount of battery backup for that wind and solar.
Yeah.
We're going to have continuous
How
power.
much battery backup is it assuming to kind of smooth out the solar?
I don't have any battery backup put in there.
Okay,
like,
'cause
I
it's
thought-
There's gonna be.
There's going to be some, but the amount we have now is totally insignificant compared with what we would need. Hudson,
Can you jump in? So currently Excel, Minnesota's biggest utility, so not the whole state, but the biggest utility in the next 15 years is proposing 600 megawatts of battery backup. But they're proposing to build an additional 2,200 megawatts of gas. So instead of going away from gas, they're going to be building significantly more.
but note that Hudson is talking about megawatts and I'm talking about megawatt hours. One is power and one is energy. So they are not the same, the numbers, you have to be careful with the numbers. Yeah. Oh, okay, we want our power to be reliable, clean and cheap, right? Everybody wants that. You can't have it all. Okay, if it's reliable and cheap, you can do it with coal and gas. That is not clean. If it's wind and solar, that is clean and cheap, but it's not reliable because the sun goes down and the wind doesn't always blow. If you do it with nuclear, it's reliable and it's clean, but it's not cheap. So we have a problem here. How do we fix it? All right, we'll use CCS. So instead of coal and gas spewing into the atmosphere, we put our little magic box on the top and we put the CO2 underground where it's safe and out of the way. We have wind and solar. How do we make that reliable? We build a hell of a lot more of it than we need, and we have a lot of batteries. It can be done. If we want to build nuclear, there's this new thing called small modular reactors, which have the potential of being both reliable and less expensive than nuclear is at the moment.
And safer.
And safer, yes, we hope so. Now, since we have members from CURE here, and they've been talking to us extensively about carbon capture and storage, I am totally convinced that this is not a good way to go. I don't like it. It's being used for enhanced oil recovery. It's not being stuffed in the ground where it's safe. And the carbon dioxide pipelines are a menace. So I'm not going to consider that as part of this talk. Wiping it out. All right, so now there's hydrogen. You can make green hydrogen from wind and solar. You can make pink hydrogen from nuclear. And if you're lucky, you can get white hydrogen out of the ground, although we don't know how much there is.
Remind us again what the green, pink and white is.
Green is made from renewable energy. Pink is made from nuclear. And white comes out of the ground ready formed to use in some places, if you're lucky.
You don't know where that's.
Like helium.
Like helium, but yeah, hydrogen instead. And of course, hydrogen is good for many issues, in particular parts of heavy industry and heavy transportation.
Making metal.
And I'm not going to talk about that here either. Okay, and then there's fusion. And there have been some really nice advances in fusion energy recently. And I still think it's 20 years old. And so maybe by 2050, I'm not saying we shouldn't research it. I think we should keep working on it, but don't plan on it. Okay, so now this is my beginning slide. What are we going to do? We're going to talk about the history, types of reactors, how they've developed over time, where they are, who's using them, what the trends are, a little bit about safety. We're going to talk about nuclear waste. We're going to then get into regional electric power and some of the recent legislative actions that are changing the scenario a little bit. This picture, the background is small modular reactor artist concept developed, where's the button? By a company called Oklo, which is run by Sam Altman from OpenAI, who is worried about all of his large language models and data centers using huge amounts of energy, and thinking that having something like this to power them would be really a good thing. One of these little neat power plants would also be good for running iron refining or remote military bases, many of which are run on diesel these days. Oklo put in a proposal at 2022 and it was denied, and they're still working on it. So they are typical of many of these small startups that are busy developing things and proposing things and getting them turned down and turning around and proposing something else and so on. There's a lot going on. Okay, so let's start. These generations of nuclear energy aren't as distinct from each other as they look here. And they start with generation 0, which was a pile of uranium bricks in a squash court in Chicago in the 1940s. And that developed through various other experimental reactors into various different ways of doing work. And most of them were really looking at what the physics is like. What can you make work? What is sensible to use and what is not sensible to use? Almost all of these were made in remote sites and had very small power output. And we learned an awful lot, but there were many different varieties of reactors back then. And some of them are coming back in the generation 4, the brand new ones. So after generation 0, there really was a decision to go with the water-cooled reactors, the boiling water reactors and pressure water reactors. And that was pushed a lot by decisions that were made maybe for military purposes. Rickover wanted he wanted nuclear submarines. He chose a particular reactor type for that. And there was a lot of push back at that point that reactors should be developed not for commercial, but for military use, where they could produce plutonium, and they want plutonium for bombs. And so the choice of reactor type was influenced by all sorts of odd things like this. In any case, generation 1 came along, and those were the first reactors that were built near cities to power cities. And they are essentially all retired at this point. They were almost experimental reactors. It was a pretty daring thing to do back then. The generation 2s are mostly the boiling water and pressurized water reactors. And that's what we have right now. That's what our 2 reactors, Prairie Island and such like, are. Generation 3 are a little bit more advanced than that, and 3+ are really quite sophisticated reactors that have a lot of safety features in them. A generation 3+ reactor, if it's going full blast and it gets hit by a tsunami or an earthquake and it loses all power, will shut itself down safely without any backup power and without any human beings interfering. It won't necessarily be easy to start up again, but it won't do you any damage. It will just shut itself down safely and go to bed. The generation 4 reactors now pick up from that, and a lot of them have a lot of other features, which we're going to talk about. Okay, so here we are. Prairie Island and Monticello were built in the 70s. They're still operating, and they may get permits to go through 2040 or 2050, in which case they'll be 80 years old. And the new reactors, we have 2 number 3 and number 4 just came online in Georgia. Over budget and over time, Westinghouse went bankrupt getting them operating, but they are running. They're great big things and they are beautiful. The Gen 4, the only one I know that's actually feeding a grid is in China. Okay, this shows us how nuclear power increased over time, starting in the 70s. Almost all of these reactors are in the Northern Hemisphere, surprising. Chernobyl happened in 86 and didn't seem to affect the number of reactors. Fukushima in 2011 clearly had an impact. Germany and Japan, of course, closed down a lot of their reactors. And who has them? What countries? The USA has the most, followed by China and France. Per person, France beats us out hands down. In the 70s, France realized they have no oil and they have no gas. And if they wanted to have energy independence, they'd better build nuclear. So they did build nuclear fast and furious in the 70s. They did it in a smarter way than we did because they only have a couple of reactor designs and they built the same thing over and over again in different places. But they have the problem that all of their reactors are getting old at the same time. China has a lot of reactors, but nowhere near as much as we do. On the other hand, they're building them hand over fist at the moment. Okay, so here's the Gen 4. I'm not going to go into physics. I would love to. I mean, it would make this talk so much easier to get inside. But you can see there are different flavors of these Gen 4 reactors. They have different fuel sources, different coolants. They operate at different pressures and different temperatures. And this all goes back to some of the Gen 0 reactors when this stuff was originally developed. And some of those designs are really good and they never got picked up on. Some of these are good if they are high temperature reactors. That makes them more efficient. That means their waste heat is more useful for industrial purposes. If they are at low pressure, it means they don't need a big pressure dome because they can't explode because there's no high pressure stuff inside there. They use different fuels and different coolants and such like. And they have some things in common. They're all walk away safe, just like the Gen 3 Plus. You can have them running at full speed. Some catastrophe happens, no more power. The reactor just shuts itself down. They can do load following, which is important. If your nuclear reactor is backing up your wind power and the wind stops blowing, you have to crank up your reactor. If the wind starts blowing, you want to crank it down again.
Like an hourly time
On an
frame?
hourly time frame, not a minute's time frame, but an hourly time frame. And the existing Gen 2 reactors can't do that. The small modular reactors, the idea is that you build this thing in a factory somewhere, and it's the sort of size that you can put on the back of a truck and drive it to the facility. So you still have to have the site prepared, so you slot it in, but you don't have to build this monster thing right in place there. And so since they are all the same when they're all built in the factory, you have economy of scale by doing that. Right.
So are they all, like the beginning ones on, how is water, is it water cooled?
No, they're not all water cooled.
Or-
And that is here, coolant, helium, lead, fluoride salts, sodium, water. The reactor that I toured in Dounreay was cooled by sodium and potassium.
That longer, that.
Right. In fact, one of the designs that Rickover wanted to use in the submarines was cooled by sodium and potassium. And somehow the idea that sodium and potassium react furiously with water and a submarine is underwater seemed maybe there were better choices to be made. So it didn't go that way. So what do we actually have running? TerraPower is Bill Gates' side exercise. And that is, he has a whole bunch of things going, test sites in Washington. Kairos Power has a demo reactor going into Tennessee. TerraPower again has Natrium, which is planned for Kemmerer, Wyoming, the site of a coal plant that is being closed. And apparently Kemmerer, Wyoming is very enthusiastic to welcome this plant because it's providing a lot of power and a lot of jobs.
And it's all mobile.
And
Are these all, they're all mobile units?
oh, they come in a truck, but
Yeah.
once they're installed, they're not mobile. You don't drive them around once you're operating them.
I've
okay.
seen them transported.
Okay,
That's why
all right.
When might that one come online in Wyoming?
Oh, I think they're talking about 2030 now.
That far out?
Yeah, yeah. The one in Dounreay was the same design as this. Although the same design in terms of fuel and coolant. The physical design is quite a bit different since we're now 60 years on. What else have we got? We've got NuScale in Oregon, and we finally got an actual working reactor in China. This final design. X-Energy, by the way, just got approved for 40 reactors in the UK. They won't be at 40 sites. They will be bunched in 4s and 8s at different sites, either at old nuclear sites or at coal plant sites.
In the UK?
In the UK.
Yeah.
The coal plant sites are sort of ideal for this because they have all the infrastructure right there. All of the switching and the grid connections are all right there.
And they're kind of a problem, a cleanup problem anyway. You know,
There.
don't deal with it. I think it's important to understand this modular concept. If you're building a reactor out in Armpit, Wyoming, and it turns out there's only 12 people in the world that can make that well, you've got a problem because you're trying to build reactors all over the world. You know, to get all that expertise there briefly, where you get a factory, you just set it up. You know, if the guy at pensions, he just, you know. Yeah, there's a lot of real technical work that can be much better done in building.
Yep.
Than out
Yep.
in prairie.
Okay, so what's happening these days? In 2023, there were 5 new nuclear reactors connected to a grid in China, Slovakia, USA, Belarus, and South Korea. And the one in Georgia is the brand new one that we have. 6 construction starts, 5 in China and 1 in Egypt. That is, by the way, China building a reactor in Egypt. And 5 shutdowns, 3 in Germany, 1 in Taiwan, and 1 in Belgium. Yes, that does add up. Okay. Germany is closing their nuclear reactors and firing up their coal plants. They got scared by Fukushima.
It's,
And Angela Merkel is in charge. I never could figure that out.
Well, okay. In the USA, we've got 93 of them, not 93 different sites, because many sites have multiple reactors. And it makes almost 20% of our electrical energy. We had the new one come online, photo number 4 came online just a month ago. Over the last 15 years, we've closed more than we've opened, but the ones we've kept open have undergone rework and being re-permitted, and a lot of them have increased their capacity. So although we haven't built any new ones, we actually do have a larger capacity now than we used to have. And this is where they are, which sort of amazed me. I thought they'd be more evenly distributed, but they're all almost all out east of the Rockies.
entirely away from where we actually mine uranium, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah,
It's right there.
yeah.
There's no nuclear.
It is surprising, you don't see very many on the west coast.
On the other hand, you know, you don't need much uranium
Yeah.
to keep your plant running. It's easy enough to move around.
What western state is, where are they mining in the
They
western
used,
states?
they used to mine it on the western slope in Colorado.
Okay,
They had a lot there.
It's now currently mostly all mined in Iron County in Utah.
in Utah, I think it might be.
And of course, the Northwest never needed, because they had the hydropower out at Columbia River.
Yeah,
And of course,
yeah,
that's a map of all the commercial plants. It doesn't have any of the DOE reactors on there, including the 50 reactor cluster that's outside of Idaho Falls.
yeah. I have not included any military stuff in
No, that's
in
not
this.
military, that's DOE.
Okay, but sometimes the lines are a little blurred. So you want to keep the old nuclear plants operating. There's public pressure to have clean energy, and the utilities certainly want it, because as they switch to wind and solar, they need baseload power just to keep things rolling. So 6 states actually provide subsidies to keep about 20 reactors open. As gas and wind became a lot cheaper, it gets a lot harder to run your nuclear power plant at a profit. And states have just said, well, you know, we really do need to have this. So the 2021 Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act provided some federal assistance to keep old nuclear plants operating, just to make them whole, so that their bottom lines are reasonable, they can keep operating. And then there's more subsidies in the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act, including production tax credits, which again helps the existing plants to stay whole. It also expands credits that were available only to wind and solar to new nuclear plants. So those plants can get either a production tax credit or some sort of capital cost subsidy to help them to get rolling, because of course it costs a lot more to build a nuclear plant than it does to build a windmill or to put up a solar plant. And the IRA also puts up some funds to make fuel. Fuel for these plants, especially the Gen 4 plants, comes primarily from Russia, who do their fuel processing. And we don't want to have to buy our fuel from Russia. This is called HALEU, high assay, low enriched uranium. And so the US is starting again to build its own fuel. Okay, China doesn't have many plants, 55. They're only making 5% of their energy that way, but they've got 22 under construction and 70 or more planned. So they are going to overtake us lickety-split because they're going full tilt. This is where they are, almost all around the coastlines where people live. And that one Gen 4 plant, it doesn't look anywhere near as elegant as the Oklo picture that I showed you. It looks just like a standard commercial site.
As long as besides where the people live, the energy is consumed. The water.
And the water,
Is can be
right.
used, is transportation to build them, to get, it's been a factor also.
I assume so,
I assume there's in this company.
yeah. Yeah. And here you can see that China still gets almost all of its power from coal, with a substantial amount from hydro. And the nuclear is just that little dark blue slice at the top. So it's building up, but it's building up fast, but they still are majorly polluters. And talking of polluters, This is a measure of how clean the electrical power is in various places in Europe. You can see that France is green. They're almost all nuclear, and the rest of it is wind. Poland is very polluting. It's almost all coal in Poland. A lot of coal. Somebody?
Because then again, when they grow up, oh no, you're doing a great job with your second chance. Just pretty started. Amy Schneider is back with us. Right?
Okay, thank you. And then you get to the case of Norway. Norway gets almost all their power from hydro. But of course, they dig a lot out from the North Sea, oil and gas from the North Sea, which they export. And so it builds up their sovereign wealth fund, and it doesn't count against them in terms of how dirty their power is. So this is quite interesting. If you want to look at the same plot for the USA, you see that Canada up there in the Northeast, that's all hydropower. That's why it's so green. And the coal belt in the middle here, that's pretty dirty. Up in the Northwest, there's hydropower as well. And in Minnesota, we have a mix, as we saw earlier. So we're not the cleanest and we're not the dirtiest. Let's move on here. Okay, have to talk about safety. These are the biggest news getting incidents that I've dug up. 3 Mile Island, you may remember, was a big news story. And it happened about the same time as that movie came out, right? The China Syndrome. 3 Mile Island was not a China Syndrome. The core got too hot, but it didn't have a total meltdown. There was a small amount of radioactive steam, no deaths or injuries, and the radiation exposure was sort of typical of a transcontinental airplane flight. A lot of hot air about, not very much, maybe, or maybe not. This I did not know about until this particular talk. It happened about the same time as 3 Mile Island. A big failed dam at a uranium mine. Do you know about this, Katie?
Yes.
Okay. Maybe you have more to say about it, but you know, it affected the Navajos, the pollution, the uranium ran down the river for 80 miles or so. And I don't remember any media coverage. No.
But you heard about 3 Mile Island.
Yes, good. And then there's Chernobyl, 1986. This was a Russian reactor in Ukraine that was built simultaneously for electric power and to make plutonium. Because they wanted to make plutonium, they had to pull the core out frequently. And to pull the core out and replace it so they could get the plutonium out and put new stuff in. They had no cover on the top of the reactor, and they had no shield over that. So every month they would pull the core out and process it to get the plutonium. So that's one part of the design that was really bad. So it really was a military reactor. Then they did this crazy experiment when they had no nuclear personnel on site, and they ignored all the warning signs, and things went bizarre and caught fire. It was not a nuclear explosion, it was a chemical explosion. But nonetheless, it injected a lot of radioactivity into the air. And the estimates of long-term damage are very hard to do for a thing like this. I mean, we get radiation all the time, and people get cancer all the time. whether it's from radiation or not. So separating out one thing from another thing is really difficult. George Erickson claimed that there were only 80 lives lost from this. The UN claims that there are about 9,000. And Greenpeace, we know, is strongly anti-nuclear. Say maybe 90,000.
What do you want it to be?
Where do we put the list? That's the biggest one.
Yeah, now there's Fukushima, and you know this story. The seawall was not high enough. Apparently, a year or so earlier, it was high enough. They took it down because they wanted to do some work on the plant. They didn't put it back up again. They should have put it back up again. The plants were not walkaway safe, and the coolant power to keep the coolant going was run by diesel generators in the basement that got swamped, and the rest, you know all about that. Nobody died of radiation, but many people were moved out of the area, and many died because of the trauma of moving. And so I'm calling that radiation terror. And then I want to bring this into scale. Whenever you do something big like this, things go wrong, and you can't prevent everything from going wrong. This is what we are dealing with. The Chinese had a dam collapse in 1975 that killed 26,000 people. That was hydropower.
It was what?
Hydropower dam. In the US, we lose about 50,000 people a year for firearms, that's suicide and murder. And about 10,000, 100,000 for overdose deaths. So, you know, we have to put these things in perspective, and it's not easy. If you want to make electricity and count how many deaths you get per unit of electricity energy, coal is the dirtiest, followed by oil, biomass, gas, hydropower, and nuclear is way down here at the bottom. And that counts all of the deaths that we know about from all of these accidents.
Some people would argue that your number for solar can't possibly be right when you think of all the people climbing on roofs installing.
It's like what kind of accidents are counted?
They're deaths, I guess. Maybe they just break their legs if they fall off a roof.
They teach you how to fall off the leg first, and that's step one.
And now this is 8 million excess deaths each year are attributed to air pollution. Now that comes from burning oil and gas in your car, as well as burning oil and coal in a power plant. But it is an astonishingly large number. And a good part of it is due to oil and coal in power plants.
May I add, wood is in there too.
And wood is in there too, yes.
Biomass, that's wood is in biomass.
Yes, yes. And of course, this doesn't count fossil fuel damage to the climate and people who die from disasters because of climate change. So let's keep going. All right. This is what we all think of as nuclear waste, right? And this is what it actually looks like. These are dried cask storage, nuclear waste casks. And you can see that people are moving around on the outside of them without any protection. And I would have one in my basement, except that my basement isn't big enough.
They're warm.
They give off a little bit of warmth, yes. It's actually only a few kilowatts, not as much as you might want.
Is this what they use Monticello and?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
I'll show you
Fuel
that.
rods standing up in those?
Mhm.
Fuel rods that are standing up? in
Yes,
them?
yes. So this is the industry's spiel on waste. Waste from a year's operation would fit in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. And over all of the operation of the nuclear plants in the US, If you stack all that waste together and put it on a football field, it's going to be 10 yards deep. So it's not much compared with the amount of junk that coal makes in particular.
Especially if you count CO2.
All right, yeah, the CO2 will count in a moment. Okay, so here's the but. It's kept in dry casks. There is no long-term underground storage. There was supposed to be. Yucca Mountain started research on Yucca Mountain in the 70s, and it was defunded in 2009, opposed by the tribes and by Harry Reid, who I'm sure you all remember. And this is a federal responsibility. When Prairie Island and Monticello were opened, they expected to be able to ship their nuclear waste out to the feds, and the feds would take care of it. That was part of the deal in the original setup. And they failed. It's not there. There is a nuclear waste depository in New Mexico. You may know about this one, Katie. It's for weapons, for military purposes. We used to have about 70,000 bombs, nuclear weapons, and now we only have a few thousand. A lot of that material can get rediluted and used in commercial reactors, and a bunch of it gets buried in this plant in New Mexico. So they managed to build a waste depository. So here we go. If you compare these two power plants, both 1,000 megawatts, the nuclear plant makes 35 tons of fuel per year and no CO2. And the coal plant makes 300,000 tons of coal ash, 6.5 million tons of CO2, and 400 tons of toxic metals. This stuff, coal ash, is radioactive and poisonous and contains all manner of nasties. The poisonous elements don't decay. They're, you know, if you've got thallium and mercury, they're poisonous forever.
We should have left them in the ground.
Yeah. And what's more, coal ash was not declared as a hazardous waste until 2015 in Obama's. All the coal plants dumped their coal ash in unlined ponds before then. So there is a lot of it in unlined ponds. New coal ash that is made now has to go into lined ponds. I hope that makes you feel better. The
Lined
coal,
pond.
I don't know.
They're supposed to, I mean, they're supposed to stop water from going through. There's a really big and old coal plant in North Dakota where they're saying we would like to keep running our coal plant forever and continue storing it in unlined ponds. And the EPA was like, that's your whole pitch? No. And the state of North Dakota is fighting pretty hard to keep letting them dump it in an unlined pond. So it's still happening in this day and age, but that 2015 change was because around 2012, there was a huge coal ash disaster in the
Right.
Tennessee Valley Authority,
Right.
and it wiped out people's houses, and everyone was like, wow, this isn't a fun thing to have, crush your house. So yeah, it's a slow moving solution to an extremely old problem.
Okay, so what do the nuclear plants do if they don't have ability to ship it off to the feds who put it underground? And the answer is when they take it out of the reactor, they put these rods into water. And they stay in water for about 5 years. And it keeps them cool and it shields the radioactivity almost completely. So they're safe when they're in the water. They like to keep the water flowing so that it stays cool. By the way, if you fell into one of these ponds, it wouldn't do you any harm as long as you stayed close to the surface. If you dove down, water is a very good screener. So if you dove, there's about 20 feet of water above the stuff. Oh, it doesn't matter if it mixes. But if you dive down and you're close to the fuel rods when they're fresh, then you're toast. But if you don't do that, you're fine. It's just a warm bath, but I don't recommend it. So after you haul them out of the water, you put them into these big concrete casks. There is enough remnant energy that does not get used in this material that gets hauled out, that it could be reprocessed and reused. But that is illegal in the USA. In 1977, that was made illegal.
And it can be argued that you're stupid to throw it away.
Yes, and I believe that it will be changed because up front, it was thought that uranium was rare when they first started. And a lot of work was done on these breeder reactors that made more fuel. But then it was found that uranium is not so rare. There's quite a lot of it around. We don't have to be so clever. We can use it willy-nilly and throw it out and just get some new stuff. So that's what's being done here. So here's your dry cask storage, and you see what it looks like. The radiation levels outside of this cask are pretty low. The whole thing is passive. It's designed to withstand earthquakes, tornadoes, floods, temperatures extremes, and such like. So it's pretty safe, but of course, human beings made it, and if they want to, human beings can take it apart again. So it's clearly not an ideal solution. These casks are put on pads, which look like glorified parking lots with fences around them. And the fence is put up at a certain level of radiation background, which is about the same as the radiation background we have right here. So if you go camp at the fence, you're getting double the radiation that you would here. Is that significant? Well, not really. I'm going to go to bananas now. Bananas contain radioactive potassium. Background radiation is equivalent to eating about 4 bananas an hour. So if you eat 4 bananas an hour and you have background radiation, you've doubled your radiation dose. Okay. In some places, the ground itself contains special elements that make the background level very high. In Iran and in India, there are some background levels that are like 70 to 100 times what we have right here. They do studies on people, do they get cancer at a higher rate there? And as far as I can read, they don't. If you take a plane flight, that's equivalent to eating 100 bananas an hour. Of course, you may suffer from other problems if you eat 100 bananas an hour.
How many pieces of banana cream pie you get?
Real cream pie or metric cream pie?
And just to make you all happy, our bodies contain potassium and carbon, the radioactive isotopes of both. And in our bodies, we have about 4,000 decays per second for each of those elements, per second. Now, the carbon is part of your DNA, or some of it is part of your DNA. When it decays, that is a problem in your DNA. But fortunately, your DNA is a double spiral, and the other part of the spiral says, hey, there's a problem over there, I'll fix it. So somehow we've evolved to live with this. I like to think of it as the same sort of problem with salt. You need to have a little bit of salt every day, but you don't want to have too much. If you have, this is a reasonable amount of salt per day. If you add up how much you would take in over the year, it's about 1 kilogram, over 2 pounds of salt. Now, if you sat down and ate 2 pounds of salt, you'd be dead. Radiation is the same way, a little bit all the time. Doesn't do you any harm and may in fact do you some good. Finland has a nuclear waste site in operation. It's open this year. They're putting their junk down there. And it works just fine. And I'm not going to say any more about it, except that they have that really cute sign, which is supposed to be interpreted by anybody thousands of years from now, and so they understand what the hell they've got down that hole. And the USA, what do we have? We have a process in place that is happening called the Nuclear Waste Informed Consent Act. So support the DOE's effort to facilitate inclusive community engagement and elicit public feedback on consent-based siting, management of spent nuclear fuel, and federal consolidation of interim storage. So they're trying to find communities that want the waste. And they, in fact, have some interest, as you can see from this map, about communities that want the waste. And there's going to be an effort to educate those communities. Here it goes. Phase 1A is complete. Phase 1B is trying to find people, trying to educate people in the community, trying to figure out if the community really wants to do this. And then, of course, trying to find out if the geology is suitable to do that. Then they have to screen the site. Yeah.
Just start with the geology.
I think they think that it's harder to find the people than it is to find the geology. So then you have to do some screening criteria. And then you have to do some preliminary assessment. And then you have to do some more of that. And then you have to finally get everything together. And I think this looks like a good plan, except for this one problem. 2 years, 4 to 7 years, 4 to 5 years. So this isn't going to be done in a hurry. So it's going to be a while before we have a nuclear waste site, if we ever do have a nuclear waste site.
Are you thinking in northeastern Minnesota?
I don't think the geology will work. Although it is tempting to think that you could put it down a mine that you don't use anymore.
It won't be that simple, but I would think it might be pretty good up here.
The matter is how much water flows through, and they like to keep it in a place where it's above the water table. Now,
It's a mistake to think that the water table is infinite, because the water table is not. And the water table in Minnesota ends at less than 200 feet down.
okay, so maybe,
Once you exceed 200 feet, you're in the stable craton of North America. It doesn't get earthquakes and doesn't shift, it doesn't go anywhere. And if you ask the nuclear professionals who actually thought about this problem a great deal, they used to say, yeah, let's go drill some holes in Michigan and Wisconsin and Minnesota, and stuff it down the craton and pull those holes up and then everybody goes,
but we already
and that's
have,
the end of it.
we already have the holes.
Actually, I heard there's a rumor going around Ely right now that the Sedan mine is being considered for a nuclear waste site.
I haven't heard that.
That's just-
Heard that too?
No, I was thinking.
Isn't that just going to reopen, isn't it?
Well, true, for
Well, for
as a
tourism.
state park, right.
They just spent how many millions doing it?
Yeah,
And it
well,
does have the two big labs that are empty because.
that's right,
because
and the bats are
projects
all
moved
dead,
on.
so you're not gonna kill the bat population,
I worked down there for 5 years, and at the time, one of the rooms was that we had missiles that could fold in half, so you can get them off the bottom. Any kind of rumor I would be able to help you with.
I like this side.
Okay, so I decided to look around and see what we actually have in our environment. And none of it, of course, as far as I know, is nuclear waste. but there is a lot of waste and some of it is really nasty stuff. So this is the MPCA site called What's in My Neighborhood. It covers the whole country. You can blow up whatever piece you want to blow up. And these are all the sites that the MPCA is monitoring. And if you want to see locally, here's Ely. So if you go to this place, you can actually point your little mouse at these sites and it will tell you what they are. It is, for example, a gas station that has underground gas tanks, which may or may not leak, but at least have to be monitored to make sure that they're not going to leak.
Didn't the holiday just leave
It did,
recently in the
yes,
miners'
it did.
lake, like in the last 5 years?
Right.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, these are not Superfund sites. These are just little
Dry cleaning.
dry cleaning. Thank you, yeah. So we, so here,
My garage should be on.
well, let's hope your garage is not a Superfund site. Here they are. These are, of course, not nuclear sites either. And they're all over the place. Here's Minnesota's dose of Superfund sites. The active ones and the closed ones, and they're so surprisingly large. Oh,
They're giant industrial sites where there's a potentially responsible party who has put a bunch of, usually a few specific toxic items into a waste dump or something.
Did Elk River do this? Minnesota?
maybe. I
Entirely possible. I mean, so like, for example, isn't this North Shore?
Yes,
Yeah,
Reserve money.
and then that's gotta be, Taconite Harbor.
yes,
But is it Minneapolis, like 3M and Honeywell and?
right, right. Oh,
Down the pit
yeah.
on Highway 1 is
So I'm not going to go over this. You can look this up when you get home and have fun looking at what
The
you've
name
got.
of that site.
I'm going to post this whole thing
Oh, okay.
online so you can go back to it.
Thank you.
Okay, so local nuclear power. We've got two power plants, Prairie Island and Monticello. And I'm running out of time, so I'm going to scoot through this fast. They're both old. They're Gen 2 plants. They came online in the 70s. They have radioactive waste stored in steel casks. They are being, their permits run through the 2030s at this point, and they are applying for permits to go through 2040 or 2050, at which point they will be 80 years old. But they're still running and with a few leaks here and there, not too much, I hope. They are doing the right thing. By the way, the Prairie Island site is right next to the Indian community. The Indian community now gets payment of $10 million a year plus $50,000 per cask, dry cask stored on site. And the state of Minnesota also puts in $40 million a year to this, Excel puts in $40 million to the state's renewable development for renewable energy. So the Prairie Island community does get some financial recompense for this. They of course got,
Just start last
well,
year. They
yeah,
didn't get anything for a real one.
I think it was 2.5 million prior to last year. They did get screwed. I mean, they were not at the table when decisions were made to take their land, either for this or for the Locken Dam, which is also on their land. Here's Prairie Island plant. At the bottom there, you can see where the casks are stored. That's what it looks like. As Hudson says, it's like a parking lot with a fence around it. There's a blow up of the casks. And that's what a photograph looks like.
And Prairie Island's located where?
Red Wing on the river.
Right on the river, right in the river.
Here in Minnesota.
Well,
And Monticello is on the river too. Okay, here are our local plants. Wisconsin has got one plant. North Dakota and South Dakota don't have any nukes. Iowa doesn't have any nukes. Illinois has got 6, provides them half their power. Michigan has got 2 operating, 2 closed, and they are planning 2 small modular reactors. Canada has got a whole bunch of plants. Here's our coal plants. Minnesota coal plants. Sherco closing in 23, 26, and 2030. Clay Boswell closing in the 30s. Allen King closing 2028. Hibbard, I don't know a date. There are more plants, but they're smaller. I didn't put all the little ones in. And then I just put the bigger plants in South Dakota and North Dakota down here. None of those I could find a closing date on. They don't plan to close them. And there's Coal Creek, of course, which we all know about, was sold to Rainbow together with that high voltage line. And then there are 15 gas plants in Minnesota, and the total of that is 5,000 megawatts. You can see there's a whole bunch of megawatts in these coal plants that are going to disappear as they close the coal plants. The gas plants are not being closed. The gas plants are being opened, unfortunately. The Nemadji Trail Energy Center, Superior, Wisconsin, is undergoing permitting right now and having troubles. You can see here the blue line shows coal decreasing in the state, and the greenish line at the top is renewables increasing. Underneath that is a greenish line which shows gas increasing. So this is how we are changing our energy mix. Okay, moratoria. You thought I would never get to it.
I thought I was waiting here for an hour.
Okay. Minnesota has a moratorium that dates from 1994. And it was put in place because of the problem with nuclear waste. Other states have moratoria also. And Germany is a particular country that went that direction after Fukushima.
Barb, isn't Illinois in the process of
Right.
relieving that?
My next point here, states lifting moratoria include Illinois. They passed it last year, but it doesn't get lifted till 2026. And these other states have also lifted their moratoria, and that includes Japan. They are now getting their nuclear plants up and running again. Here's our ban. It says you will not make any new nuclear power plants. And if you want to extend the life of an existing plant, you have to justify it, and you have to provide storage for the additional waste. And you have to get all the I's dotted and the T's crossed. So our 2 plants have not been closed. Their licenses have been extended, and their generation facility has actually increased. So here it is, 1994. The legislature has tried to repeal this a couple of times and failed. This one, I remember in 2009, Walz was a senator at that point, and he supported the repeal. In 2023, there were 100 bills in 20 states to repeal moratoria or use of SMRs. And it was done successfully in these states that we listed before. Okay, so in 2023, Nick Friends and Andrew Matthews put out a plan to adjust the moratorium or make a study on the future of nuclear energy. Matthews is the senator from the district that has the coal plant that's closing, Sherco. He represents Sherco, so he's losing a lot there. He also represents Monticello. I think those two are quite close together. So he is very interested in the future of energy in the state. And
These are state senators.
these are state senators, and Francis DFL, Matthews is Republican. Okay, so they asked for a carve out from the moratorium that said, maybe we can have SMRs, just little ones, not go with these great big things. Let's just have SMRs. And maybe we should have $300,000 to have a study to see what we can do. And neither passed. So here's the clean energy bill. That was last year too. Energy has to be electrical energy has to be 55% renewable by 2035 and 100% carbon-free by 2040, which is not that long from now. Okay, renewable means solar, wind, hydro, and biofuels. So this 55% does not include nuclear. But the 100% by 2040 does include nuclear. But it's still a pretty steep climb from where we are. So France calls this a goal, not a mandate. There's some odd things in this. Biomass is considered renewable, even though it may not be. The NTEC, Nemadji Trail gas plant is considered renewable.
What?
What? Yes,
Yeah,
it
talked
is.
to Grant House show, but,
If
you gotta put it.
the utilities really get the squeeze, they can use renewable energy credits, that is, go out and buy renewable power rather than generate it, which makes an off-ramp, and that, of course, comes in place if cost or reliability is threatened. Now, I promised Hudson a moment here.
Well, I mean, these are great points. NTEC is written into the bill as not counting towards as carbon because it's in Wisconsin, and also they just did it in a very simple way. The utilities are all planning on using RECs. So I mean, I like optimism, but they're all planning on burning fossil fuels for 100 years to come, but also going and getting a credit for a megawatt generated in North Dakota from a wind turbine and taking that credit and moving it from North Dakota to Minnesota and then retiring the credit. So that means more pollution in Minnesota, less pollution in North Dakota, which does accrue to our benefit to some degree, but it on a whole, trading pollution credits means there's pollution somewhere. And in this case, we're actually importing pollution into Minnesota, but buying credits from someone else. I also do have an update on a couple of the things that happened last year, if folks want to know what's happening right now. They did again propose the nuclear study bill, which I think has a good chance of getting passed. On Thursday this week, the Senate is going to be hearing a bill that would, in a very sneaky way, lift the nuclear moratorium. So
Okay, they're all here.
what's that? Oh, you got it. Oh, okay. And the only thing I would say is that the carbon free by 2040 bill actually has a comment period that's open in June of this year, which I will probably update everybody about on the listserv, where we can all fight over what is carbon free and what's not. And biomass is definitely going to be one of the things that we're fighting about, whether burning stuff is carbon free. I would argue it's not.
You don't like my wood stove?
I just don't think you should hook it up to the electrical grid. I don't mind you heating your house.
Oh, okay, I wasn't.
Yeah.
Okay, so to get online again, these are bills that I took off Senator Matthews' website. These are active at this point in our legislature, and they were all reported in committee as of last month. And they're not all nuclear, but one is carbon capture and sequestration, prohibition, abolition on issuing certificate of need for new nuclear plant. I hate these double negatives, but that does mean that if it goes through, they will allow it. Yeah. Advanced nuclear study. So here's the money to look at the problem.
That was about 300,000.
Or 150, I think it changed a little bit. I don't know. Not a lot. And here's one on using nuclear to make hydrogen. I put that in because I knew Jerry would be here. And small modular reactor certificate need of authorization. So those are all in play at this point. Whether they will go anywhere, we don't know. Do you?
Well, what I was gonna say, so this is a standalone end to the nuclear prohibition, that's not moving. What's moving this week is something that where they're selling it. Senator Friends is saying this is to make more solar and wind, but what it actually says, it's like anything that is carbon free no
Mhm.
longer needs a certificate of need. So sneakily, they are getting rid of the nuclear moratorium because all of us would argue that nuclear is carbon free
Yep.
energy, that's obvious.
Yeah,
So they didn't say,
the IRA played the same game.
So what happens when you have the two laws conflicting?
there's a House version and a Senate version, so we'll see what happens.
No, I meant the current nuclear moratorium and
Oh,
the
this,
ones that are
this,
currently
the
going.
one
through.
I'm talking about would lift the moratorium because the current moratorium says you cannot get a certificate of need for a new nuclear power plant. And the bill that's being voted on says you don't need a certificate of need for anything that's carbon free. So it is a very sneaky way to just walk.
One says you
walk
can't have a
right.
certificate, and the new one says you don't need a certificate.
Yeah, it's a very
That's sneaky.
efficient way to do it.
Okay, so we're almost at the end here, folks. And this is my no free lunch picture. There is no good way of making perfectly clean, uncontroversial electrical energy. You know the problems with coal, carbon dioxide and coal ash, gas, carbon dioxide and methane, which leaks, oil, carbon dioxide. These fossil fuels are all the same. Wind is intermittent. It needs rare elements for big magnets. It's large area, visual impact. It's not good for birds and bats. Transmission lines don't go to wind places. You have to build them special. And you have to dispose of the blades and the towers when they get old. The solar takes a large area. It's intermittent. It's ugly. Well, I think it's ugly. You should be growing corn on those fields or trees or something. Batteries are coming along fast, but they are not there yet. We still need to do a lot of work, and especially on the exotic elements that the batteries seem to need, except for the iron air batteries, of course, which we hope will work out. Corn ethanol and biofuels, you've heard about those a lot. Nuclear, its downside is that there's no nuclear depository, and there is still paranoia because of the association with nuclear bombs, and it's going to take a long time to overcome that, I fear. Okay, so how will it play out? What will happen? What should we do? And I think first we should have a carbon fee and dividend or some sort of price on carbon, because that will skew things in the right direction instantly. And we should get rid of the Minnesota moratorium if we can. We have to close the power plants, and there is pressure from consumers to do that. So I think that will happen. We need to close the gas plants, but that's hard because the utilities want to keep them because they want to have a stable grid. And of course, we want to have a stable grid too.
And the gas is cheap.
And gas is cheap, right? We want to build a lot more wind and solar and storage that has to go with that. And that's hard to do. Use the best sites first and so on. We need to keep the old plants running, the old nuclear plants running as long as we can, as long as they're safe. And we should start to think about small modular reactors and put them on the sites of the closed coal plants where they can hook up to all of the good infrastructure. And we need to update our transmission lines. The Europeans are not stringing transmission lines with steel in the middle. They string them with carbon fiber in the middle. And then they can wrap more aluminum around them. And so they can hold something like 50% more power. And another advance that is not being done here is that you put a temperature sensor on your transmission lines, lots and lots of them that report in automatically. Right now, you close a transmission line down because it can overheat. So you have to control how much power goes through it, especially on a hot day. But if you monitor its temperature, you can keep jacking up the power until you get to a point where you say, all right, that's hot enough. We don't want to go any farther. So you can get another 20% that way, almost for free. Okay, we need to build more storage, underground storage. With the consent of locals, maybe in Sudan, maybe not. And we need to build fuel processing facilities so that we can take advantage of the stuff that we've got. And that is enough for one day. I'm sorry, I went over.
Are you gonna send the slides?
I post them on our YouTube website.
Okay.
So the whole thing, the slides and the recording, the Zoom recording will be there.
Okay, just fantastic.
Very good.
It's fun to do.
The professor came through.
Quiz at 11.
Uh-oh.
So off to the next.
I think it's important to realize that if you expand solar and particularly wind, you're expanding into less desirable. You always pick the best of the story because modular reactors, where you need them.
No.